This is episode 120. How to stop yourself from complaining so much. Even if we know complaining isn't helpful, many of us do it unconsciously throughout the day anyway. Here's a way to stop and retrain your brain so that you can create more of what you want instead. Hi, I'm Carla Rieger, and this is the Mind Story Speaker Podcast. So there's the conditioned mind that's full of the default programs, consciousness bias, mind stories that you didn't consciously choose. And then there's this true self, this presence that lives in the here and now, where you have choice over the mind stories you live by, where you can hold a neutral stance on external reality that isn't locked into certain train tracks of thinking, but has a spacious freedom that the conditioned mind doesn't have. Some sages throughout the ages have said you can assess your spiritual development, your personal growth, on how often you can stay in that spacious presence, that true self, free from all that conditioning. So a lot of what I talk about on this podcast is being a better person, better leader, speaker, communicator through anchoring into this unconditioned true self. It's like a one-stop shop for massive effectiveness in life. And it's a practice over time, like peeling the layers of an onion to get down to the core essence, the true self, without any of the overlays. And most of us are work in progress in this way. For example, when you're nervous about something like an interview or public speaking or going on a date, and a well-meaning friend says something like, "Hey, just be yourself." And most people have a cognitive disconnect when they hear that. They don't actually even really know what being yourself means. That's because you may or may not have peeled the onion down enough. You may not have met this part of you at all, or very often, or even realize there is this animating force within you that can see, do, and know all kinds of things that the conditioned mind just can't. But if you're listening to this podcast, chances are you do have an understanding of what I'm talking about, and maybe you are there often or sometimes, or go in and out of that awareness. But if you can make this spacious presence, this true self connection part of your everyday life, then it grows. What you focus on grows. And eventually this spacious presence of the true self never leaves you. So you will be able to use your mind without always in the background having some chatter from the conditioned mind. And most of us are not 100% present each and every moment, where not 100% of your consciousness is drawn into the mind stream, say, that formulates the words you say, that allows you to really listen. Most of us are lost in the permutation of the default programs. So there's these train tracks of thinking that activates our emotions, which activate our actions, which activate our results. And if you go on that train ride, you tend to keep getting what you always got before, which you may or may not want. And usually there's not too much wisdom in that kind of thinking. You're just contributing to the unconsciousness of the human collective mindset. On the outside, it might look like you are discussing how to solve problems, but you might not truly be allowing yourself to see beyond the problem, to change the frequency within yourself that started the problem in the first place. But when you operate more from the true self, this deeper wisdom, then you can open up the possibility of living in an entirely different frequency where that problem doesn't even exist. It's like that famous quote that is often attributed to Albert Einstein: "You cannot solve a problem with the same mindset that created it." To get to that new mindset, that new frequency, you often need to stop thinking. Get off the train of thoughts that you are used to thinking. And that can create a kind of cognitive dissonance, a discomfort, a complete halting of your personality projecting itself into this reality. It can be jarring not only to yourself, but to others around you who expect you to act in certain ways. So think of any problem you used to have that no longer exists. If you can decode, deconstruct, analyze how you went from problem to no problem, you can better understand this phenomenon and do it again. A simple example is where your external reality changes, where maybe you lived with family or roommate or spouse, and then you live alone. And all kinds of issues that you needed to negotiate when living with others no longer have to be negotiated because you live alone. But it can also happen when your internal reality changes. For example, a client of mine was eager to find a life partner and start a family, but couldn't quite find the right person. The right circumstances just didn't show up. So at a certain point, she just decided to stop looking, stop trying to create that. No problem, no more issue. She had all this life energy to focus on other things. She decided life is fine just the way it is in terms of significant relationships. And she got one later on. And there's also that strange phenomenon, the person who beats themselves up for being overweight and then finally accepts the weight they are, stops trying to bully themselves into eating less and moving more, and then they start to magically lose weight. Or I've seen this one a lot. A person wants to start a business. There's what they want to do, and then what they think the marketplace will bear, what it will pay for. And then they try to find a marriage of the two. But if they veer too much in the direction of what they think the marketplace will bear, but it's not really what they had in mind, what doesn't really turn their crank, I noticed they often ended up struggling, pushing to find success, or if they did get successful, they ended up feeling trapped and burned out by it all. If they veer more on the side of doing what they want to do and getting creative and thinking outside the box, tapping into the deeper wisdom in terms of how to make that into something people want, really serving their needs, that they're willing to pay for, they tend to have more success and will stick with it longer through the ups and downs. And it's that inner shift from trying to do something that they think people want to doing what they feel called to do at a deeper level, where all of a sudden they go from trying to push a huge boulder up a hill to things just magnetizing towards them. And it's often not exactly what they wanted or thought they needed, but if they let go of the train tracks of conditioned thinking on all that, they discover it's actually perfect for them in a way they couldn't see before. In all these instances, what really happened is that they changed their mindset, they jumped off the train tracks of thinking, and the problem disappeared. And the reason that's tricky to do at times is that many of us have a dysfunctional relationship with the present moment, with what life is offering right now. And the way to know if you have a dysfunctional relationship with the present moment is to think about how much you complain. How much you think about what you dislike, what you hate, how critical you are of yourself and others. So it could be other people that you complain about, or yourself, or circumstances. Everything usually fits into one of those three categories. For example, how your ex-partner parents your kids, how you keep running late for appointments and you beat yourself up about it, or how bad the weather has been. Now, if you really think about it, the conditioned mind loves to complain. But the body doesn't actually like it. Because what happens when you complain? How do you feel? Uncomfortable, frustrated, disappointed, angry maybe. But it feels good to the ego, the conditioned mind, because that strengthens the ego, the conditioned mind. Like when you complain about another person, that ego has enhanced itself. It's like, now I'm superior to this person or that group, and I'm complaining about that. That's what it looks for. That's how it operates. Superiority, inferiority is like a piece of malware, just as ugly, beautiful is, or any number of dualistic ways of thinking. So the ego feels superior when it can judge another negatively. Therefore, it seeks out any opportunity to judge other people's situations, places, actions. It triggers an entire consciousness bias where you're looking for the problems, looking for the issues, looking for what to nitpick about. It needs you to do that to strengthen its existence. Now, as I've said in other episodes, the egoic mind, the conditioned mind, is actually just like software in your biocomputer, and some of it operates like malware. making your whole system function suboptimally. Now, some ego programs, some conditioned mindsets are useful, like how to tie your shoes or how to operate a car, how to bake a cake. These are just stored instruction sets so that you don't have to relearn those things over and over again every time you want to do them. But sometimes we store a series of instruction sets on how to, say, act in a relationship when it comes to communicating your needs, or how to feed yourself throughout the day, or how to do a speech. And those instruction sets might be suboptimal. The original learning was flawed, and yet there it is on autopilot, operating on default every time you encounter that situation again, continually making the same mistakes over and over again. And even if you're aware of those mistakes, it's somehow you can't change it because you're on this train, you have this train tracks, and that's just what you're used to. But the more you can anchor back into the true self, you can look at these instruction sets, this entire story or mind story you have about how to do something or how to be in the world in certain circumstances, and decide whether you want to keep doing it that way. So the more you're willing to unlearn and then relearn default areas of your life, the more free you become, the more effective you become, the more successful your life tends to be. But again, that takes practice, like building a muscle. So I would go so far as to say that everything you complain about is not the real you. And many of us start identifying with these thoughts and even judging ourselves for being judgmental. But that's, again, just the malware trying to fortify itself. Does that mean you should never complain? You should never look for faults? Of course not. You need to have a discerning eye. But if you're in the grocery store and you're looking at 3 possible melons to buy, wondering which one is the sweetest, you want your discernment at top functioning, which is often a combination of logic, looking at external signs, but also tapping into your intuition that can actually sense into the health of a melon. The problem comes when you're not able to stop yourself from complaining about things that, if you really think about it, aren't constructive. For example, how you look, how your brother acts around your mother, or how there's no one you can find to help you when you're shopping in that store. Yes, certain discerning thoughts can help if you're looking tired. Oh, maybe I should get some sleep. Or if your brother and mother ask for your opinion on how to improve their relationship. Or a discerning thought can inspire you to write a positive suggestion for having an employee wander around the store seeing if they can help customers. It's when you just want to complain, either to yourself or others, without saying what you want instead. Because the conditioned mind doesn't want to find a constructive solution. It wants to create havoc, and so will insert itself into other people's business when it isn't really your business. And if you really notice, you will see that it doesn't feel good to the true self to complain. And the true self is intimately connected to your body. It might feel good to the fictitious psychological entity that we call the ego, the conditioned mind, but if you could examine the physiological function, the body would feel its energy decrease when you complain. If you could observe your stomach lining, for example, you might notice it become red. If you could watch your hormone levels and your brain waves, you might notice that cortisol secretions go up. Beta brainwave levels get more agitated, which throws off your peace of mind and throws off your hormone balance, which makes you extra tired later in the day. It also might show up in your heart. Your heart feels tighter, blacker, or more numb if you are complaining about someone in your life. You have to cut off any feelings of compassion or empathy or love or even just everyday respect or tolerance for other people's differences. Life becomes this place full of stupid people doing stupid things. So how does that affect your energy throughout the day? How's that going to affect your optimism about the future or your motivation to be out in the world interacting and doing things? You're more likely to just want to hide away like a misanthrope, not taking any chances in life, writing off lots of people, opportunities, and circumstances, and just missing out on life, all because you let the malware replicate itself too much. For example, have you ever sat in a group and watched someone lead the group or speak to the group, and they seem to have this underlying disdain for the people they're talking to, or even a disdain for having to do the role they are doing? Do you want to be led by them? Do you want to be open to what they have to say? Do you enjoy being in that group? Chances are, no. And yet it's quite common to see people like that. Even if they are good at hiding it, most people can pick up on it. In contrast, have you ever sat in a group and watched someone lead the group, speak to the group, and they seem to have this underlying respect for the people they're talking to, and they love the role they're doing? You tend to enjoy being led by them. You tend to be more open to what they have to say and even enjoy being in that group frequency more. People are often unaware of how much the underlying complaining malware affects the frequency with which they do anything. It keeps it low. It keeps it ineffective. And like attracts like. People who complain tend to attract more people complaining about them. Or they tend to attract more unsatisfactory situations, as opposed to people who just stay present, neutral, connected to their discerning mind, but they're willing to have compassion, respect, open-mindedness to situations and people. They tend to attract more people who are that way towards them, and they tend to attract more satisfying versus unsatisfying situations. So the minute you notice yourself on this autopilot mode, which we can all get into, where you're complaining about someone you live with, or complaining about other drivers on the road, or complaining about what you didn't get done that day, instead of being lost in those thoughts, that is the beginning of freedom. That is the moment you have choice. You can say, okay, I want to continue being in this dysfunctional state that tends to attract more of what I don't want, or you can say, maybe I don't want to continue. Maybe I want to be in a more functional state that attracts more of what I do want. For example, say you're feeling upset about having to wait for someone who is late, and you notice you're upset. You notice this tightness in your chest, and you just ask yourself the question, why am I upset? Because of the situation? No, I'm upset because of what this conditioned mind is saying about the situation. That's an amazing realization, but it does help to do it in the moment it happens. At first, you tend to realize after the moment has happened, and you look back on it and say, oh, that was silly that I got so upset that the person was late. I had to wait a few minutes. So what? It doesn't really make much difference in the big picture of things. But then the more you do it, the more you catch yourself right in the moment. Oh, there's that conditioned mind doing this thing again, getting upset at what people say or do, getting upset at the noise or the heat or the wind or how I'm being. So then you have this moment to look closely and you see it's just this malware doing its commentary, trained to replicate itself. This thing that isn't even you, doesn't belong to you. It's just some old default program that somehow got installed that you can uninstall anytime you want. So it's not really about the situation. It's just your thoughts about the situation, which create emotions, which change your brain chemistry, which makes you see more of the things you want to complain about. And when you realize that all these situations, all these people are actually just neutral, they only have meaning based on the meaning you give them, it's huge freedom. People are only annoying because you've deemed them as annoying. Sounds are only annoying because you've deemed them as annoying. Because I'm sure you've been in a group where one person annoys you, but other people are not annoyed by that person. Or it's not a big deal to them how that person acts. Similarly, you could be at a musical event and you don't like the music, and clearly other people do. It's not the person, it's not the music, it's your interpretation, the meaning you give it, how you experience it. That's a good reminder that everything that comes to you in your external reality is neutral. It only causes a reaction in you by the thoughts you choose to have about it, by the meaning and interpretation you give to it, which then creates certain emotions, which then changes your brain chemistry, which then creates you acting in a certain way, which then creates certain results in your life. If you can trace it all back to it's just a thought I'm having about a neutral thing, and it's just maybe a thought coming from a piece of malware that I have control over, it gives you so much more power and freedom. So when you realize that situations are neutral, then you no longer have to personalize things. Oh, that driver's driving purposely to piss me off. That teenager is acting like that just to make me frustrated. People don't usually do things purposely to piss you off. Maybe occasionally they do, but mostly they're just lost in their own little story. You start to accept that other humans are often unconscious. They often say things that come out of their unconscious, conditioned mind, and it's really not about you. It's just them being on autopilot. So it's about becoming okay with, even friendly with, what is, what's actually happening in this moment. And if action is required, it will be more powerful when it comes from this neutral presence and not out of this reactive state, this resistance to what's going on in that moment. And there will be a wisdom to the action. The action will be more likely to be skillful because it comes from whole brain thinking. So the neocortex is involved instead of the fight or flight brain thinking that many of us operate in a lot of the day. Just think about it. We all admire people who can be calm, cool, and collected in a crisis, where they make smart, wise decisions when everyone else is getting upset. That's just a learned skill that anyone can achieve. And that kind of skill gets built just by these little decisions we make in the moment, these little moments of waking up to the present moment, waking out of the trance of the conditioned mind, and seeing that it's just the old malware doing its thing, and feeling empowered by knowing I can delete it anytime by just overriding it with conscious thought. Like, oh, well, that's just the way it is right now. Like if you can't change the situation. If you can change the situation, it's still better to be in a neutral state of mind so that your act of changing the situation comes from a place of wisdom and not from a place of reactivity. Think about two people at the lost baggage claim desk, where one person is belittling the customer service person for losing their luggage and shouting and causing a lot of stress for the people around them, as opposed to the person who's going, okay, I understand that mistakes happen. What can we do to make sure I get my bags as soon as possible? They're probably going to get their bags sooner. Having coached people who work at those desks, I know this is true. So you ask yourself in each of those situations, is there anything I can do now? Can I change the weather? No. Can I put on a coat to stay warmer? Yes. Can I change the topic of the conversation if it's starting to veer into someone else's business that I don't think is our business? Can I leave and reschedule the meeting because this person is late? But you're making all these decisions from this neutral place of, it's okay that this is happening in this moment, and now I choose what I choose, and that's okay too. That's a very different stance than calling the late person and saying, where the hell are you? Being in a non-reactive neutral state, you can just focus on the facts. Hey, we had a 45-minute meeting scheduled, which was supposed to start 15 minutes ago, or that's what I understood. Just wondering where you are and how you want to proceed. Neutral tone of voice. Let's just problem solve the situation. Let's just focus on the facts. And let's decide together how we want to proceed given that the situations change. Who knows? Maybe they had an accident. Maybe their last meeting went over time. Maybe they misunderstood the start time. Maybe you misunderstood the correct start time. If you stay neutral, then you can avoid a lot of unnecessary heartache, conflict with people and within yourself, which is much better on your health, much better on your daily perspective on life, and leads you to more of the out-of-the-box thinking to solve things in the moment. For example, have you ever moved house with somebody else who had a very different style of moving? Like one person wants to be very detailed and organized and thorough, and the other person doesn't really care about being that way. They just throw some things in a box at the last minute, squish it down. If it doesn't fit, they don't label it. Maybe not ready when the movers arrive, and things maybe get to the new destination, maybe not. It doesn't really matter to them. Whenever you do things together with other people, there's going to be differences in how it's done. And if you focus on all the ways you don't like how the other person does things, then you can make your life very miserable. Instead of complaining about how lax and disorganized they are, maybe the organized person could learn to be a little bit more relaxed about it all. Maybe it doesn't really matter if you have to open 6 boxes to find a spatula because the box wasn't labeled. Maybe it's better to not spend 5 hours doing something that you could do in 1 hour because it was less detailing, and where you get the same result in the end. Maybe the more relaxed person could learn something too, instead of complaining that the other person is just way too strict about how things need to be done. Maybe they could realize that waiting until the last moment actually is less relaxing in the big picture. Maybe they could have packed things more carefully so that the things were not damaged at the other end. And so it becomes a learning experience instead of a complaint fest. So the moment we choose to rise above the complaining mind is the moment we can learn new ways of being in the world, new ways of interacting with the present moment and with others, which often leads to epiphanies, more success, more intimacy, more effectiveness, more joyful living, better health, more peace of mind and growth, freedom, and becoming more aligned with the true self. So if you want a way to move from the complaining mind to the true self, do try using our 5-part AVARA model in our book, Mind Story Inner Coach. And you can work through things you're complaining about and break yourself free out of it. It just takes a few minutes. So if you just go to the free tab of mindstoryacademy.com, you'll see the Mind Story Inner Coach book, within which you can get the AVARA model. You can fill in the blanks, just follow along with the 5 parts, moving from one section to the next, and you'll be amazed at how many epiphanies you get, how much more quickly and easily you can let go of the complaining mind, be more neutral, be more peaceful, and rise above. So that's it for today. Thanks for listening.